Good afternoon. While they're looking for my presentation, hopefully the clock is not ticking. I'm from the Higher School of Urbanism, and just as a continuation of the previous presentation, I hope that we'll speak about the polycentricity of Moscow. Now, clock's ticking now. Some context, what's polycentricity? Well, polycentricity is the antonym of monocentricity. Alonso introduced this monocentric city in 1964, where a city where everything is located in one center. Then in 1982, Fujita and Ogawa created this model of polycentric city. I called it industrial polycentricity because those who succeeded them, then McDonald and Macmillan, they focused on the industrial polycentricity, and then post-industrial polycentricity proposed by Michael Batty, Mr. Vysokovsky, Pomorov, and Tchaikovsky. These are centers where people go by their own will, not places where they have to go. Sometimes these two combine. So it's shops, barber shops, libraries. So normally these places are next to places of work, places where we live. So I think in Moscow it makes sense to look for this kind of polycentricity. Technically, what that is, so monocentricity is kind of an indicator that we can measure, and on the left side you see that this indicator goes down or decreases from the center to the outskirts. So why do we need polycentricity? Well, according to the economists, polycentricity rises where people make more money and the cost of life goes down. So basically, transport flows are optimized. The functionality of the city is more diversified. There are more services in the cities. So our goal was to define the polycentric structure of Moscow, to see how you can connect the new development of Moscow to the polycentricity and define the characteristics of these centers. Tools, we used the non-equal district model of Mr. Vysokovsky. The idea behind it was to look for the post-industrial polycentricity. We tested it in dozens of cities in Russia. There are several papers on that, and it is actively used when justifying city planning and district planning. Raw data, I think I will skip this stage. I'd like to say that we gathered a lot of data of places visited in Moscow. So how many centers there are in Moscow? Well, only one. You might think so, of course. If you look at the density of the service points, the service facilities, you might think so. But actually there are a lot of them. And if you look over time how the structure changed from this map, it's a rare case where maps are not a good example. You might think it's a chaos. So it's better to use a chart and not a map. So what happened to the city centers? Well, the first and second level centers, they grew in the recent years, and then they stabilized, and third level centers appeared. So we see this as a relaunch of a cycle of balance.
Здесь мы можем увидеть, каким образом, собственно,
So we see how centers survived, how they existed, with dark red. These are the centers that were the most powerful starting 2005 and are still powerful till now. Then you see second level centers. You see how dark brown or brown centers become a lower level center. So now localization. Centers for 2015. So construction of housing and non-residential buildings in numbers and in units and in square meters. So you see that the growth rate is higher where there are no attraction points. Where there are attraction points, the volume is higher. So developers, they try to increase the profitability of their projects thanks to the location. So we looked at the center's characteristics, transport accessibility. So red to green, that's a scale from 0 to 10 million people. So color marks how you can access this area. So it's an accessibility map. So on the left side, you see the first level centers. They're closer to the historic center of the city, but not necessarily located there. And you see second level centers, which are located a little bit far from the city center, from the historical center. So if we split them by categories, you can have this kind of charts which show actually again the accessibility. So the first level centers have the higher transport accessibility, and of course transport accessibility for the second and third level centers is lower. But nevertheless, they have sufficient transport accessibility to become the next level center. Then we looked at the number of visits or traffic thanks to Foursquare and WhoMap. So we looked at where people go and how much the real estate costs. It's not that big if we calculate rubles per square meter, explained by the fact that there is an average level of prices on the market and they cannot differ too much because prices for instance, rent are quite closely linked to the income level. Well, Moscow, as a conclusion, is a polycentric city. Despite what we think about it, and based on other research data, we see that people really don't go to the city center every day, or they often don't leave their homes more than 2 kilometers outside the place they live. So there should be centers where they can go, of course. Location and how centers are created thanks to the development projects, but where the accessibility, the transport accessibility is high, and where voluntarily visited sites are located. So, of course, developers use these key attractiveness points because people go there more often and transport accessibility is better. You have 1 minute. No, you don't have any minutes because 9 minutes have passed. 15 seconds. So this was a retrospective analysis showing how centers were created. So it is a tool, a method to forecast how city can change in the future depending on our plans. Thank you. Sorry for